So the final bit within approaches is comparison of approaches. Now you need to be able to compare and contrast different approaches. So a way to help you think about what you could compare on is the acronym of SARDINE. So is the approach scientific or not? Does it have any application, in particular treating abnormality? Is it on the reductionist side of the debate, or is it holistic? Is it deterministic, or does it argue that we have free will? Does it take an idiographic or nomothetic approach? Is it on the nature-nurture side of the debate? And is there any extrapolation? Do they use any animal research? Now, most of these are based on issues and debates. However, you've got some ideas of scientific and animal research. So we're going to look at a grid in a bit more detail. So you've got the different approaches there and where they fall in terms of scientific application, reductionism versus holism, deterministic and free will, idiographic, nomothetic, nature versus nurture, and extrapolation. So is it tested on animals or is it tested on humans? So what I'd suggest is you have a go at learning some of these, so it's easier to make that comparison on the different approaches. So in terms of scientific, behavioural, social learning theory and cognitive and biological are scientific. So they generally use scientific methods, the use of lab experiments, brain imaging techniques, whereas psychodynamic isn't scientific, it's unfalsifiable, and the humanistic rejects scientific method altogether. Application, they all have application in terms of treating abnormality. So we have systematic desensitization and flooding techniques for behavioural. Social learning theories can be used to explain how behaviours such as aggression can be learnt, so Benjira's Bobo doll study. Cognitive, the use of CBT and REBT. Biological drug treatment, so SSRIs to treat OCD and depression. Psychoanalysis, talking therapy and the talking cure. And counselling treatments, the client-centred therapy by Rogers. In terms of reductionism, so think back to the issues and debates. So we've got experimental reductionism within the behavioural approach. Social learning is still reductionist, but less so than behavioural, because it considers some cognitive factors. Cognitive experimental reductionism, biological reductionism for the biological approach, and psychodynamic is arguing that all elements should be taken into account, and humanistic is very holistic in its viewpoints, and humans should be studied as a whole, not in terms of reductionism. If we had to look at, say, extrapolation, so behavioural, remember all human species learn the same way, so they advocated the use of animal research, so dogs and monkeys and rats and pigeons. Social learning doesn't use animals in research. Cognitive is not appropriate to use animal research. Biological widely use animals in research, so testing the suprachiasmatic nucleus within chipmunks and hamsters. Psychodynamic and humanistic do not use animals, only test on humans. So, for example, if we were to look at this 16 marker, outline key features of the cognitive approach in psychology, so that's going to be your AO1. Compare the cognitive approach with the psychodynamic approach. So this is being very specific in which it wants you to compare. So your AO1, talk about the assumptions of the cognitive approach, the role of schemas, computer and theoretical models, and cognitive neuroimaging. So your 2 AO1 paragraphs there, mentioning those broad 4 key areas of the spec. Now, in terms of similarities and differences, so similarities, you wouldn't need to mention all of these, but they both take into account both nature and nurture. They both offer practical applications in treatment of abnormality, so CBT for cognitive approach and psychoanalysis for the psychodynamic approach. They both research on humans rather than animals, so we can generalise the findings to the target population, we can extrapolate the findings. Differences, cognitive approach is scientific, whereas the psychodynamic approach isn't. The cognitive approach has soft determinism, argues that we have some free will, but the psychodynamic approach is deterministic, it's psychic determinism. And also, cognitive approach experimentally reductionist, so machine reductionism, information processing models, whereas psychodynamic approach is less reductionist, it believes that all elements of an individual should be taken into account when studying human behaviour. So how would you sort of structure your discussion, your comparisons? So remember, we need a point sentence. So one similarity between the cognitive approach and the psychodynamic approach is they both have applications in the treatment for mental health conditions. For example, the cognitive approach has led to the development of CBT in treatment of depression, in particular the use of REBT. Elaborating a bit more, plus the psychodynamic approach was the first to advocate the use of the talking cure in the development of psychoanalysis. That link sentence, that saying why this is a benefit and linking it back to that point, this demonstrates the importance of the psychological research in society and the developments of therapies based on psychological understanding of human behaviour. Our comparison, so a key difference between the two approaches is the scientific nature of research. For instance, the cognitive approach uses well-controlled lab experiments and standardised procedure. This means data is reliable and very scientific. However, the psychodynamic approach takes more of an idiographic approach due to the use of case studies and subjective interpretation of a client's dreams or free association. Therefore, the approach isn't very scientific. Thus, the cognitive approach focuses on creating non-pathetic rules on conscious thought processes through the use of scientific methods, whereas the psychodynamic approach focuses on generating rich, detailed data on individuals' unconscious thoughts. Now, in terms of some 16 markers you could get, it has been claimed that the humanistic approach has little to offer psychology. Outline and evaluate the humanistic approach and refer to at least one other approach in your answer. So this one isn't getting you to compare with a specific one, it's asking you to think about which would be the best one to make comparisons between. Similarly, the next one, outline and evaluate social learning theory. In your answer, make comparisons with at least one other approach in psychology. So you're having to pick which would be the best one to do so.